My name is Joana T, and I am a Luso-American Latina. I've been in the US for over 16 years now. And right now I started my own business called Culturalizing Access. And I help organizations reach Latinos and other limited English proficient communities through language services. So throughout my experience here in the US, first as a limited English proficient person, not knowing English, I had to figure out how everything worked. And then when I became a translator and interpreter, I started noticing that this is something that happens to a lot of immigrants. And even though the law requires for language services to be provided for those individuals, most organizations don't do it correctly. They just do the bare minimum. So what I do is I help them make sure that they are, they're up to par and they're offering quality services for this immigrant and other communities. So yeah, that's what I do. I think it's important for me to share my story when it comes to mental health and as an immigrant, because in many immigrant communities, I'm going to speak in the Latino and Portuguese community, it's much of a taboo still, and we don't really talk about this. And it's something that it needs to be talked within our families, with our friends, that from one standard. And then when you add the immigration, which is a whole different level of mental health issues, it makes it even harder when you have the cultural and language barriers. So access is really hard to get it in with a person that understands your culture and your language. So that's another barrier. So I want to share my story so people, immigrants and Latinos, know that they're not alone, and that, we should talk about it, and we need to do something about it for ourselves and our future generations. So I've always been an immigrant. I was born in Portugal, and then I moved to Venezuela when I was 2, and I grew up there. But when I was in Venezuela, I didn't really feel like an immigrant. I just felt like any other Venezuelan. Then when I graduated high school, when I was 18, I came to the States, mostly because I wasn't sure what I wanted to go to college for, and the situation back in Venezuela wasn't very stable. So I decided to come to the US just to learn English, just because I didn't know it. And after a year as an exchange student, I decided to stay here and do college. So I did that. I was in Wisconsin, and I was there for 3 years, and then I needed some city because I grew up in a big city in Venezuela. So I moved to Chicago to finish my undergrad. And then I decided to do a master's. So I moved to North Carolina. I've been everywhere. I moved to North Carolina. I was there for 6 years. And then we moved to the New York area for work. And that's where I've been for the past 3 years. But my immigration story is not very unique. I mean, I came here without knowing anybody. I didn't know that language. I had to figure out all by myself. I did have a host family. It was very nice to me, and they guide me a little bit, but there was a big cultural barrier. So that cultural side I had to learn by myself, really. And when I moved to Chicago, I was even more fortunate because one of my best friends from college, he was from Chicago, and he introduced me to his family, and they had become my family since. They're like my adopted American family, and they're like my parents and my siblings. So they have been a very, very big support, because for the first years, I just didn't have anybody. And it was really hard, that part of being alone. My sister then moved to the US when I was in North Carolina, and then my mom finally moved like 3 years ago. So I'm not lonely anymore. But yeah, it was a tough process. Outside my immigration and my mental health were very interconnected. I didn't realize it really. I mean, I was very young, and mental health is not something that we spoke back home. So for a long time, I just ignored it. I think the first time I did therapy was after like 3 years of being here. And then from there, even though I've been in and out, I love it. And it's been hard to explain to like my family. Like when I say like, oh, I have a therapist, they're like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, nothing is wrong. I just want somebody to talk to, somebody that's neutral. Because the biggest barrier that I had when it came to my mental health is that I felt that I didn't have anybody to talk to. So people here in the US, they really didn't understand what it meant to not know the system or not know how things work. And, you know, even though people move from one state to the other, like for college and things like that, and that's a big difference within the US, is their own culture in different states. It's a whole different one. It's a whole country difference, right? And then, so I didn't have anybody here that would understand. But then I would go back home and I didn't have anybody to understand what it was to leave your country and leave your language and not know anything. So for a long time, I felt like I didn't have anybody who would understand my situation. My friends, I was one of the first ones leaving after graduating, and most of them stayed. Now they're all around the world because of the political situation in Venezuela, and I think I only have like one friend back in Venezuela. Everybody is abroad. And now they're like, oh, now I see what you were saying, you know, 15 years ago when you talked that you didn't understand and you were always looking to go back home for Christmas or for summer break. But it got to a point that it was really hard for me because, especially talking to my mom, we were always very closed. But every time I would tell her that I was sad or that I was lonely, her first reaction was like, just leave everything and come back home. And I was like, I can't just leave everything. Like, I have a life here. So yeah, that was very, very hard, feeling like I didn't belong and I couldn't talk to anybody. So my therapist, it helped, at least for a while, yeah. I think that even though my parents, before my dad passed, were in Venezuela, and, you know, I could always go back there, I didn't really feel like that was like a safety net for me. It wasn't an option. Not because of my parents, or not because I wasn't privileged enough to be able to just drop everything and go back home, because it was for the political situation. There was just no way that I could go back to Venezuela. And it's actually been like almost 10 years since I've been there, and I'm not planning on going there anytime soon. Not because I don't love the country, not because I don't want to, but just the situation is just not, especially now that I have a son, I would love to bring him back to Venezuela. But I don't think I'm going to be doing it anytime soon. So I could always also go back to Portugal. I mean, that's where I'm from. That's where I have my whole family. But I never really belonged there either because I didn't grow up there. I just used to go there for vacation. So really, none of these three places were home for me 100%. So I felt like I didn't belong here because I was an immigrant and I was just trying to figure out everything. But I didn't belong back to Venezuela either because my friends were not even there anymore. The country's not what it was. And Portugal was always like my home, but I don't have any roots there besides, you know, my cousins and things like that. So I really never felt like I had a safety net. It was just like, this is my decision of being in the US and that's it. And I have made it my home. I think like after 17 years, I'm finally being able to feel like I belong somewhere. I actually really love Jersey because of that. When I moved to the US, I felt that the only way I could, you know, thrive here and settle here was to become what the American standard was. So one, that meant knowing English. That was the first thing. So for a long time, I avoided like any Hispanic or Latinos because I wanted to make sure I spoke English. So even if I had friends that were Latinos, I would speak English to them. And with time, I avoided like my Latinidad. Like I started to like not dress like a Latina, you know, changing the way I dressed because I wanted to fit in with what's quote unquote appropriate or professional here. So I regret now that, and I know that that's not necessarily the case and that people can and should drive, you know, just for the way they are. But when I was 18, that was what I thought I had to do. So for a long time, I really avoided, like I didn't watch any Spanish TV, any Spanish radio, like nothing. The same was when I was in Chicago, when I was in North Carolina, and finally when I moved to Jersey. And that's one of the reasons why I really love this area. It's because there's so many, not only so many Latinos, but so many Portuguese. So I'm like finally connecting to my roots again. And now I can finally find, like I feel like Jersey is that mix of the three things. It's American, it has a lot of Portuguese, but it also has a lot of Latinos. And I really love that. So I'm finally finding a place that I can call home, because it has the three things, like the three cultures in one place. I think the lowest point, my mental health, well, there was two of them. One was when my dad died. I just moved to Chicago. I just turned 21. And it was a week before I was supposed to go back home for spring break. So I missed it by like a month. By like a week, I'm sorry. And I was already very depressed. The change to Chicago, even though I really loved the city, it was big. I didn't know many people, actually anybody really. I was just starting college again. And I was depressed. I was sad. I just had finished breaking up with like a boyfriend. So I was very weak mentally at that point. And then my dad died, and that was really, really hard, because I had to like figure out how to, change my plane ticket and talk to the airline and explain to them why I needed to switch. And I had to pay like $500 to switch my flight. And then it was a huge deal with TSA, because my eyes were red. I remember that, like, I had contacts. I had them in a glass with water because I couldn't keep from crying so much. My eyes were so red. And then they were like, why are your eyes red? So I had to go through like all this process of explaining why, like I wasn't like on drugs or anything. It was, this and that. And it was like the longest flight back, because there was no direct flight. So I had to stop in, I don't even remember if it was Atlanta or Miami, for like almost a night. So that was very, very hard for me. I didn't want to come back, actually. I was there for like 2 weeks. And then I had to like make the decision to stay there or come back. And I mean, I was like 3 months before graduating college, so I couldn't just not go back. So I had to make the really hard decision to leave my mom and my siblings to kind of like deal with his absence, and then just come back and move here again. So that was really hard, because I mean, I don't even know if they blame me for it. Like my sister, maybe for a little bit she did. We've been through it. I mean, it's been like 13 years now, 15 years. But for a long time, I feel like she felt like I abandoned her to come into my life in the US, like my wonderful life, right? Because everybody sees the great things, but nobody really sees the daily struggles. So I think that was like the lowest point for my past 17 years, I think. And another low point that I had was I separated 2 years ago. So I feel like the first one was a lowest point. This one was a really hard point, mostly because I was in a very tough relationship, and it was more personal. Like I was the one that was low. Like I lost myself. I didn't know who I was and things like that. So yeah, I don't think I want to talk about that one. So maybe we just focus on the first one. Yeah. My sister and I really didn't have a very close relationship growing up. Sibling things, I guess. So we're never very close. But looking back, I feel like she probably felt that I abandoned her. She was a teenager when I left. We're only like 3 years apart. So I wasn't there really for her, basically ever growing up. And when my dad died, I know she had we all had a really rough time. We all processed it in a very different way. But I guess to me it was somewhat easier because I was here and I was already used to not seeing him daily. So for a long time, for me, he was just back home. I just couldn't be on the phone with him. So that made it much easier for me versus them that they were, missing him every single day at lunch and things like that. When my sister came, it was very hard because she came kind of like forced. So she had to, get used to the US and the process and things like that. But we actually got pregnant at the same time. Our kids are like 3 weeks apart. So that was actually the one thing that got us together. We had our pregnancy together and our babies. So, she's changed a lot since she has her kid, and probably so did I. So now we have a really good relationship. We're very close and things like that. but it was definitely because of her kids or the coincidence of, being pregnant at the same time. So I'm doing a lot of changes in my life in the past 2 years since I separated and got divorced. And I started my business. So now I'm having to reevaluate what mental health and wellness means, and I have to prioritize it for myself and my son. So now I'm relearning that it's okay to take breaks and that I don't have to earn them. I can just decide that, today I'm just not up for this, and that's okay. Because for a long time I've always been, giving. There was never time for me. So now I'm learning that. I'm learning to make time for myself and finding ways. I started to paint by colors, and I actually really like it, even though I don't consider myself artistic, but it really relaxes me. Because for a long time, my ex was always like, let's meditate and put your mind in blank. And I'm like, I don't know how to put my mind in blank. Like, do I think about a white wall? Like, what does that even mean, right? Like, I don't know how to do that. My mind is always going 1,000 miles. So I don't know how to stop it. So now I'm doing that. I have to. And it's actually been kind of interesting. I never liked exercising. I just started a month ago. And I'm like, okay. And I'm not doing it for the exercise. I'm trying to find a way to channel my stress. And seeing it from that perspective has actually allowed me to kind of start liking it. And, I'm trying to, get my mom helps me with my son. So even if it's like once or twice a month that she keeps my son for a night, even if I don't actually have stuff to do, I have to learn how to be alone and learn how to be alone and, being okay with laying in the bed and watching TV all day. And that's okay. Because before I used to feel guilty about it. So yeah, I'm definitely learning a lot about what mental health should be and well-being for somebody like me, really. So when it comes to mental health and my culture, it's hard. It's a taboo. Even when my dad passed, I remember talking to my mom about like seeing somebody, and it was just not even a conversation for her, or even for my sister, allowing her to do that. So it's hard. Even today it's hard. After I gave birth to my son, I got into a postpartum depression. So I started to take medication, and my mom's, immediate reaction was like, no, don't take medication. Like, this is not okay. So, for a while I felt like I had to like hide that I was taking medication, because I didn't want to see her judgment or having to explain that it was okay. But then, recently actually I spoke to her. I was like, listen, we take medication all the time for everything. Like, you take, I don't know, cholesterol medicine, and that's forever. So what's the difference between this? If it's going to allow me to feel better and do what I need to do and, get out of bed and move on with my life. So I think that conversation helped a little bit, like seeing it from that perspective. But it's still pretty taboo. It's not something that, Latinos or Portuguese people like to talk about. It's not something that we share. Like, when we talk about, oh, how you doing? It's always, if you go into too deep or how you actually doing, it's like, oh, things will get better. Just pray. Things are gonna change. Just, be hopeful and faithful. And nothing has to do with that, right? It's more than that. So that was hard. And I think therapy has been something that I have not used as much as I would like. Like, I haven't found like a therapist for a long time. Besides the fact that when I found one, I had to move to a different state. So that made it really hard. But I actually didn't realize how important the cultural and the linguistic portion was until I recently started seeing somebody that was Venezuelan and spoke Spanish. And now I see the difference. Like, I only been with him for like 2 or 3 months. And it's so different because every time I talk to him about like, I feel like I don't belong or this happens, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. He understands where I'm coming from because he also have to migrate. So it makes a whole different, and being able to do it in Spanish. Like, normally I was like, oh, I can do it in English. I speak English. I have no issues with that. But when you're actually able to do it in your own language, you can you feel like you can breathe and be like, wow, this is not as hard as I thought it was. Like, it adds an extra layer of hardness to having to say it in another language. So that's been unbelievable how many years I lost by not having somebody, that understood me more than just being a professional. That has made a difference to me. The happiest point in my life. Wow, that's a hard one. I want to say, obviously, having my son. Because I think the happiest point in my life is right now, actually. Even though it's really rough separating and having a 5-year-old and going through the process, and one of my dogs die. I mean, it's been rough, but I still think this is the happiest moment of my life, because I'm finally able to find myself and blend my 3 cultures and what I like about each of them in a way that it's actually making me happy. And starting my business also really motivates me, because I'm not necessarily for I have my own business, but the mission of my business, I feel like it's so important for this country and for immigrants, and I feel like it's so close to my heart. So I feel like I have found, the one thing I'm meant to do, and that really actually makes me happy. For the first time, I can go to bed and wake up feeling that I am in the right place with the right people around me. And hopefully this will not be the highest point of my life, but as of right now, that I will definitely say that that's what it is right now. Wow, if I had to talk to my younger self, I guess I will talk to my 18-year-old self when I moved to the US. I would definitely tell her that it was the right decision, that it was going to be hard. But one of the things I would advise her is, like, you don't have to leave who you are to fit in, because now I'm like refinding myself and trying to find who I was when I was 18, and obviously without the youth part. But it's been a hard process doing that, and I wish I would have not done that, because I think that was, I don't want to say it was a mistake, because I don't know where I would be if I didn't do it, but really think about, not leaving, my identity to fit in. I think that's the biggest advice that I would give myself if I could talk to her. I am rooted in my mission. I have found what I feel like I'm meant to do here, why I came to this country, and the impact that I will have here, the legacy I'm going to leave, and that's going to be to improve the lives of immigrants coming here and people that live here that have language barriers, and being able to, not have to worry about these barriers for everyday things like healthcare, financial, and legal. Like, those are things that should just be there so they can thrive. So every time I need to find inspiration or energy, that's what I look at. It's like, okay, I feel like I know what I want to do and the legacy that I want to leave, and that's what gives me energy every day. Oh, motherhood. Motherhood is hard. I think that has also obviously rooted me and given me inspiration. My son obviously is everything for me, and he was the reason what made me leave the relationship I was in, because I wanted something better for him. I didn't want him to see certain things. But it's hard. It's hard because in my culture, the mothers do everything. They have all the responsibility. We have this thing that we share actually with the Black community, which is the superwoman. Latinas, we are super women, just like Black women are, and we don't get sick. We don't do anything wrong. We are there for everybody. We take care of everybody, but really nobody takes care of us. So that has really opened my eyes, and sometimes I have to have those arguments. I'm like, I need a break. And it doesn't mean I don't love my son, but I need a break for myself because I also deserve it, right? So that has been challenging, being able to, or having to explain to other people, like, no, I'm not doing it. Like, that's it. Like, we're not doing this because like I just don't want to. It's not, I don't have to have a reason, and I don't have to be there for everybody. So boundaries are really hard when you're trying to put boundaries, and then you also have to teach boundaries to a 5-year-old. So yeah, motherhood is tough as a single mom, and I'm very, very happy to have, support system that I would not have had years before. I think like if this would have happened before my family moved here, it would be a whole different situation. So, but yeah, motherhood is, especially because I have a boy, so I want to teach him these things because I want him to be part of the change that I want to see. But he's so innocent, he doesn't understand things. I remember when it was International Women's Day, so I saw one of his classmates, so I told her, happy Women's Day, little girl. And then he just looks at me and is like, when is Boys Day? And I'm like, well, that's a whole different conversation, right? But I was like, there's my son's day, so we'll celebrate that, but there is no Men's Day, right? But so it's really hard because I want to see change. I want to, teach him these things, but obviously he's 5. So balancing that with boundaries, with rules, it's a lot. It's really a lot. So that's where mental health comes in. Taking breaks for myself are so needed. When it comes to being an immigrant and mental health, there's a couple things that a lot of people don't know. Mostly because most immigrants come from cultures that don't share anything about mental health, and we have very strong, taboos and values against it. But there's 2 things that I would like to, people know about immigration and mental health. One is the sense of not belonging, that all of us feel it from the first time, and it could be 20 years, 30 years. I think maybe I will always feel it because you grew up in somewhere else. Obviously you have a home somewhere else and you have to leave that. So unless you can bring everything from home here, you're always going to miss it. Even if you're in the right place, that you came here and you're happy here, there's always a little part of you that it's always there. So that's something that will always affect you, especially when you are in a situation that you can't go back. It's not like you just can go and visit the other people's, and I'm not in that situation, mostly because I'm Portuguese, so I don't really have any ties per se with Venezuela, but I do have friends that for political reasons can't go back, and there are other people in other countries that can't go back to their countries. So that adds another thing that a lot of people don't understand is a lot of immigrants have PTSD. And it doesn't mean like we were in the army or anything like that, but for those that come from like ground, that they have to cross borders and things like that, they go through a lot of things. They see a lot of things that have, that create PTSD. And even though I didn't come in that situation, I still have PTSD in a lot of things. Grew up in Venezuela, it was a dangerous country. So, loud noises, like you turn around, you're always looking back, always checking, making sure nobody's following you, things like that. You come with that trauma. And it takes a long time for you to relax a little bit. And it definitely takes a toll in your mental health because you're always in attention. Something is going to come get you. Somebody is going to, come and follow you or something like that. And even if you don't come from that situation, like I came as an exchange student, so my situation was very different. There's another thing that's always on our heads, and that is the fear of being sent back. I suffer from that, all the time. I was an exchange student, then I was an international student, then I had my green card, and I'm an American. And I feel like until I had my American citizenship, I couldn't breathe. And even though I had my green card, I was great, and I know I was here, we're good. But until I had my actual citizenship, you don't feel like there is a weight lifted from you, because you're always like, Well, if I get a ticket, then they might not renew my visa. Well, if I do this wrong, this happen. So there's always something, or you always know somebody that's going through an immigration process, and you don't want to jeopardize it for somebody else. So you're always like attentive, like what's going on. And that's a big toll in anybody's mind and everybody's mental health. And a lot of people don't think about that when they think about an immigrant. You know, it's a whole layer of of issues that we have to deal with. Yeah.